On today's show, I am joined by Frank Madden to discuss the Milwaukee Bucks. And if you're wondering why, we'll explain that in detail, how they might look this season, the Giannis factor, and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 2034 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday. Today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make Locked On Hawks your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to the show on Apple, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube. Like the video there. And, of course, tell your friends about the show as well. In a moment, I'll be joined by Frank Madden, the founder of BrewHoop and one of the voices on Locked On Bucks. He's been covering the Bucks for a very long time, and very well, I will add. And basically, people might wonder why I'm talking about the Bucks on a podcast that covers the Hawks. Well, there are many reasons, but I would say there's more focus on the Pelicans, which is probably correct. But the Bucks are a part of this draft-based conundrum the Hawks have. So the Hawks get whichever first-round pick is better between the Pelicans and the Bucks in 2026 as a result of the draft day trade that happened 6 weeks or so ago, involving the rights to Derek Queen, the rights to Asa Newell, and of course that future pick from New Orleans, that deal that everyone, including me, has praised up and down for the Hawks. But there are scenarios, I would say, in which Milwaukee does actually send a pick that's higher than the Pelicans. I would project the Pelicans pick to be juicier than the Bucks pick, as most people would. But there are scenarios, Giannis injury, Giannis trade, Pelicans overachievement, all those things that might impact the Bucks. Because again, it's the better of the Pelicans and the Bucks. So Hawks fans will be monitoring New Orleans probably a little bit closer, but Milwaukee is definitely part of this as well. And then on top of that, I get questions all the time about Giannis and whether the Hawks could potentially trade for him at any point, including right now or during the season or next year or whatever, which we also cover a little bit with myself and Frank. So that's why we're doing this. And without any further delay, here we go with myself and Frank Madden on the Bucks. I am joined now by a person that used to be a colleague of mine in a roundabout way. I believe you were the founder of BrewHoop, Frank. Is that correct? Founder,
That's right.
Emeritus?
That's
something?
right. I was going to say, I can remember your name from Peachtree Hoops. So, yeah, it's funny how these things come full circle. But it's been 9 years since I last wrote anything about basketball. I've been basically a full-time podcaster, at least in the sense of my hobby of following the NBA. But yeah, I started BrewHoop many years ago, 2007, and started Locked On Bucks in 2016. So almost 10 years of doing that, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I am the only ever host of Locked On Hawks as well. So we're still kicking
OGs.
At this point.
Just a couple of OGs.
That's right. Back to Vox explanation style. But anyway, that's not why we're here, even though we could talk about that for a long time if we wanted to. We won't do that. I explained before I brought you in a little bit of why we're talking Bucks on a Hawks podcast in August. It's a little bit of an odd topic, but it does matter. I'll start here and we'll dive into all kinds of things. I think you agree with me on this, but I've said that I believe the Hawks are likely to get the Pelicans pick and not the Bucks pick when it comes around in June. Would you share that sentiment as someone who observes the league?
Yeah, and I'll frame this as saying, it was kind of a running joke with Nate Duncan when I used to do the Dunked On season outlooks, that like I was one of the few people who would pick the under on my team that I covered. So I like to think I'm fairly level-headed about the Bucks, and especially I got to see this team win a championship, so the rest of my life is house money in a lot of ways. And so I think I have a relatively reasonable view of what this team is and isn't. I do remember in the afterglow of draft night, I think Zach Lowe saying like, oh, anytime a Bucks pick gets moved, you gotta keep your eyes on that. But I would agree, the fact that it's a 2026 Bucks pick and not a further out Bucks pick, they owe their 29 to the Blazers, and pretty much don't control their draft for the rest of the decade, which not great. When given for reasons that I'm sure we'll get into. But I think even with this team, I think the last couple of years, I think obviously were indicators that team was not the contender it was during the kind of peak days with Giannis and Chris and Drew. I've kind of my head in terms of like where I think this team is, and then we can compare it to the Pelicans a little bit, but in my head, I feel like my guess of this team is like maybe 43 wins. I think that's pretty close to the over-under. I think it's maybe a slight under. I think I've seen like 43.5, maybe some higher over-unders have been floating around as well. That's kind of where my head's at. And it's not because I don't have optimism about especially some of the like younger / mid-20s guys on this team, or I think Miles Turner is a really nice fit, really kind of resetting the clock on the kind of Brook Lopez style of rim protector and floor stretcher that they had. But you weren't an awesome team with Damian Lillard, and you just lost Damian Lillard. And again, I think Miles Turner, especially prospectively, is going to give them more than Brook did last year, at least. And I'm a big Brook Lopez defender, supporter, etc. But I think kind of the time was coming. But yeah, I mean, I think kind of where the Bucks are, it's really hard to see them contending in a meaningful way absent another big move, which at this point would have to be involving their 2031 unprotected first. So digging a bit further. So yeah, I think again, there's a lot of guys that I'm excited to watch. I think this team should be kind of like fun in a way that maybe it wasn't the last couple of years, just because Dame dictated obviously the style of play that you play in terms of being slower, more half court, and being a little bit more kind of taking turns with Giannis, and obviously defensively dictated kind of how you had to play a bit defensively and some of the limitations. Now they don't, again, like, of course you'll take healthy Dame Lillard over, Kevin Porter Jr. and Ryan Rollins. But I think they can play maybe a more coherent sort of style around Giannis this year. And, if Giannis stays healthy, then I think it could be a fun year in a like less pressure sort of type of environment. Although, anytime you have Giannis on the roster, there's going to be pressure. Whether it's coming from Milwaukee, not always the case, but certainly kind of in the macro sense, right? You're always sort of on the clock when you have a guy of Giannis's talent level. So that brings a bit of maybe some baggage in terms of like pressure and all that. But yeah, I think they're going to be solid. I think if they make a top 6 slot, I think that's a pretty good result for this version of the team. Is there some version where they could be top 4 if everything breaks right, or they're able to, take Kuzma's salary and perhaps, that 2031 pick and turn it into a more productive player? Sure, that's all possible, especially with this version of the East. But yeah, I think expectations, let's say, are certainly the most modest they've been in Milwaukee from a wins and losses perspective. Really going back to the last Jason Kidd year is the last time I think that when I think they actually did win 43 games. It feels like we've kind of gotten back to more of that, version of the team in terms of like how competitive they can be, which, as you were alluding to, I still think puts you ahead of the New Orleans Pelicans.
Yeah.
Especially given the difference in conferences and the competitiveness that those two teams are going to be facing in their respective conferences.
This show is brought to you by Gametime. Have you ever decided at the last minute you actually want to go to a game with your friends or with your family? Maybe it's already game day and you realize suddenly that you actually want to be in the stands that day. That's exactly where Gametime comes in handy. At Gametime, it's the best and easiest way to grab last minute tickets without all the stress. With the money that you save on tickets, you actually splurge on food or drinks or merch, or even invite a bigger group of people to come with you to the game. And at Gametime, they make it all possible for you. They make it buy tickets faster and simpler for you as well. Prices on the app actually drop closer you actually get to the start of the game, and they have incredible last minute deals and a lowest price guarantee that takes all of the worrying out of buying tickets. At Gametime, they also have clear seat views. You know exactly what you'll be seeing, what you're getting into before you actually walk into the venue. You can take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets right now with the folks at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account with Gametime and use that code. It's LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And this isn't everything. I mean, and I think they would even acknowledge this, but our friends at FanDuel, of course, we talk about FanDuel all the time. And I think the Bucks are 13 or 14 wins higher than the Pelicans coming into the season in over-under win total. I don't know if the gap's that big, but it's considerable, I think. And it's also, not to really get the whole thing, but it's also this weird spot where Hawks fans, like if the Bucks have a good season, it's like, all right, shrug. They only care about the Bucks if the Bucks have an implosion season. You know what I mean? To some degree, which I think is plausible. We can maybe come back to that, particularly when it comes to Giannis. And I think we'll probably close with Giannis talk because that's actually interesting too. But before we get to that, I mean, you referenced a few things I wanted to ask you about. You know, not having Dame is obviously a big deal. You know, the Bucks have some interesting, talented guards. You know, Kevin Porter Jr. is very polarizing. He can score, all that stuff. Ryan Rollins, I thought, was a steal for what they got him for. That's someone who doesn't cover the Bucks every day. That was a great deal, I thought, for Milwaukee. Cole Anthony, not the biggest fan, but like a guy who can play. Like it's a reasonable buy low kind of on him. Like, is it basically those three guys? I know AJ Green's kind of a different player. I'm sure he'll play in the backcourt, but is that the plan for replacing Dame's production? I know they're very different players, but like, how are they going to go about doing that? Because that's obviously, other than Miles Turner, it's kind of like the big new thing is like Dame not being there.
Yeah, I mean, what you saw last year was kind of Rollins was for a while kind of thought of as like the best sort of caretaker point guard option for them, just because especially when before they traded Chris Middleton and they had more of the playmaking be able to kind of funnel through Giannis and Chris, you didn't necessarily need as much playmaking from your lead guard. And Rollins, I think really, you know, as you were alluding to, really, you know, emerged last year as just like such a good two-way guy. You know, both him and Porter are like really big, like, you know, stocks guys. And I think Porter is like definitely much more of a gambler, I would say, defensively. But I think both guys, especially compared to Dame, are certainly, you know, much more capable defensively, much more versatile defensively than certainly Dame was. I think, you know, what you saw as the season wore on, you know, KPJ kind of got more and more of a rhythm. I think got more of an understanding with Giannis. And, you know, I mean, he was a scrap heap guy basically when they acquired him at the deadline. They had expressed interest in him a year ago during the summer, and a lot of people in Milwaukee thought they were going to get him going into last season before he signed with the Clippers. And I remember when that trade happened, like I remember talking with with Eric Name, who used to be my co-host on Locked On Bucks, used to write with me at Brew Hoop, now an amazing, you know, the best Bucks beat writer over at The Athletic. And we were kind of talking like, it's like, well, Marjon Beauchamp wasn't really doing anything for you, but KPJ had an extra year with a player option, which given how he was playing in LA last year was kind of like, oh, like Bucks really taking the flyer. Like they didn't get anything, you know, for taking that extra year. And of course, you know, by the end of the year, it was sort of a no-brainer for him to opt out and get a bit more money from the Bucks this year. So it's definitely an interesting kind of mix of guys. You know, I think, you know, Doc's gonna have some flexibility because, you know, none of those guys obviously have like an existential claim on being the starter, right? Like it's going to be a competition. All of them certainly have arguments. Rollins is, you know, kind of the most role player-ish, also was, you know, shot the ball from three really well last year. Porter really came around shooting the three ball once he came to Milwaukee. Weirdly, I think it was in his, maybe, I can't remember if it was his last year in Houston or the second last year, he led the NBA in spot up 3-point percentage and was like over 40 the other year. So he was like a surprisingly good 3-point spot up guy, but wasn't really shooting a lot of threes early last year. And kind of when he came to the Bucks was kind of struggling and definitely doesn't look like the way he shoots. It doesn't look like a guy, you know, who's like, you know, shooting with tons of confidence, but the ball really started to go in. Also weirdly good at drawing 3-point fouls, the way he kind of kicks his legs out. But yeah, they have some options between the two of them. That's sort of what we saw last year. KPJ eventually claimed that starting spot when Dame was out at the end of the year. They win 8 games in a row. I think they were 16-8 without Dame last year, and Dame had a negative on-off differential, which was, I don't really know what to make of that, but to me, that's probably, you know, from an analytical perspective, like the most interesting thing to sort of monitor this year is, you know, in Dame's first year, when I don't think he played as well as he did last year, you know, the Giannis Dame combination was actually quite good. I think they were plus 10 together. The starting 5 with Dame was like plus 15. It was like the best net differential of like a starting group of any team in that first year. But like there was something kind of off at the same time. And then last year, it seemed like they were actually better, but the numbers really didn't bear that out. Some of that was because Andre Jackson Jr. played a ton of minutes as a starter and like was the only guy who was a negative with Giannis, and just I think he got actually too long of a leash from Doc. But yeah, it's sort of an interesting thing because it's like on paper you can say like, well, hey, like they weren't actually very good when Dame was on the floor last year. Strangely enough, as good as Dame is. They played really well without him at the end of the year. They were able to play like more fast paced, more kind of defensively chaotic. You know, they had a number of games where they played in kind of a 2-3 zone where they were able to kind of do a lot of ball hawking between Trent and KPJ and Rollins, and be, more of a defensive playmaking team, which they have not been at all. They've not been a turnover forcing team forever, basically. So it's going to be an interesting question to see kind of how that works out. Cole Anthony, as you mentioned, like a guy who can get buckets, but never been a super efficient guy, like has sort of survived defensively, but not a great defender, not as good as those two guys. But just another option, another kind of club in the bag. Doc loves golf, so I guess that's, an apt metaphor. So it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of balance that out with just all these young guys. Like, it seems like everybody's like 25 years old in the backcourt at this point, or in that range. Rollins is actually younger, but my personal guess is that Porter is probably, and some of the comments from Doc and Horst have sort of suggested that KPJ is probably like the most likely guy to start. And I mean, it's like pretty scary on multiple fronts when, you're really relying heavily on Kevin Porter Jr. to be like a volume scorer and playmaker for you. But he's probably has the highest upside. I mean, like he's been a 19 point per game scorer in the NBA. He's never been as efficient as he was last year with the Bucks. So I think that's something to monitor. But, again, like they need these guys to basically overachieve relative to what they've done in prior roles. And so they have this, very kind of, I think they have good depth, but who's their number two option, right? Like that's the question. Like, I don't like, there's literally like 5 guys that could all be the second leading scorer on this team. And like, I think you could easily guess, like nobody thinks it's going to be Kyle Kuzma, although he's the only other guy who's actually scored 20 points a game in the NBA. So they're in this kind of weird spot. And it's going to be a lot of, by committee type stuff, but they have good front court depth with Turner. Bobby Portis is, when he's not suspended, is always basically healthy and available and goes and gets buckets, and has developed a good, rapport and chemistry with Giannis, stretches the floor. And, they have, I think, some more lineup versatility than maybe they've had in previous years. Although the small forward spot, I mean, is kind of a huge question. Like I guess Kuzma probably starts just because like they don't have any better ideas and they want to resuscitate his value. But if he struggles the way he did in the playoffs, then that probably won't last very long. So yeah, I mean they're an interesting team. Certainly, as somebody who covers the team, it's going to be a different kind of year. I'm excited to see what Gary Trent and AJ Green, who I thought were really good towards the tail end of last year as well. Kind of dueling banjo shooter guys who do things slightly different ways, but can each bring things defensively as well. I hope those guys can carve out 25 minutes per game this year and play regularly. But yeah, there's just no guarantees, and certainly if Giannis gets hurt for with a serious injury, like all bets are off, and everything kind of comes into play.
Yeah, and if this was lots of Bucks discussion, I would go. I have lots of things I could follow up on. I'm not going to do that. But I will say, looking at the roster and kind of knowing it already, but also being refamiliarized in early August, it's like there are a lot of guys on this team that you recognize. Like old pal Torian Prince, this is a Hawks podcast, so old pal Torian Prince is like fine. Like he can shoot. That's kind of all he does now.
Leading catch and shoot 3-pointer in the NBA last year, Brad.
He's a good shooter, and
by the way, no Bucks fan was excited when he got re-signed.
I mean that's exactly the Torian Prince experience. I mean, they bring Jericho Sims, who I kind of like. Gary Harris is on this team. Like they have so many. I like AJ Green. There's a lot of guys, but you bring it up like a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, I think Miles Turner is the second best player on the team, but not really a second option offensively. It's not really what he does. Kuzma, I actually had to write something for something else about Kuzma, about like bounce back candidates, and I kind of made the case Kuzma could be better. I don't really believe it, but he was so bad at times last year. It's like, can he be worse? I think probably not. I don't mean to pile on because he in Washington it was like very unserious, but he actually put up like you said 20 points a game for a couple years in a row in Washington, and it's a weird team. I say all that to say, Giannis being there, you already gave kind of your overall, but I have this basic theory that like if Giannis is healthy, they can only be so bad. Like even if everything goes wrong, Giannis is so good that like, what's the floor? If Giannis is reasonably healthy, let's say Giannis plays 65, 70 games. What's the floor for Milwaukee if he is healthy and there all year long?
Yeah,
35 wins? Like, is it like, I don't know.
That 35 was exact. I hadn't really given it a ton of thought. But 35 was the first number I thought of as you were kind of teeing up that question, Brad. I think that's probably a reasonable figure. That for better or worse, they're not that dependent on any other single player.
Right.
So, if Kevin Porter Jr. is hurt, then it's like, okay, Cole Anthony and Ryan Rollins are playing. And, is that a huge downgrade? It may not be a downgrade at all. With Green and Trent, you've got, again, are these number 2 option type of like big time scorer guys? Like, no, of course not. But I think we saw last year that they actually can be in lineups that are really successful. And even together, even though it doesn't seem like you would play those guys together, it seems like they would be more of like for like, substitution guys. Like they actually played a ton of minutes together. I mean, the Bucks' best lineup was basically those two with KPJ in kind of a, like a 3-guard type of lineup. And with Giannis and Bobby Portis generally. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of group. And, I think the theme of the last couple of years for me was not that those teams should have been competing for championships, but it always just felt like those teams were less than the sum of their parts. And I think obviously you have to look at Doc, who I'm not as like low on Doc as some people. I mean, some people, obviously like a lot of fans just hate their coach, unless they're winning a championship.
Yep.
I think Doc has his virtues. I think managing egos in a locker room, I think, is something he does well. I think he stabilized the team, when he first came in. I think for all the noise last year when they had the slow start, he kind of kept the ship together, managed, sort of the Giannis Dame relationship. I mean, again, those are 2 very good guys. They're pros. Like, it's not like those guys are coach killers or something like that. So you would hope that would be manageable. And to his credit as well, I mean, he started playing these young guys that, supposedly Doc Rivers hates young players, but, guys like Green, and Ryan Rollins and, even KPJ's sort of like resuscitation of his career happened under his watch. So on the one hand, I think, Doc is, has some things that he's good at. But it just felt like, even you look at last year defensively, like they were totally solid. They were slightly above average defensively. They led the NBA in 3-point percentage. And for most of the year, they're basically like an average offense. And it's just like, you had the highest scoring duo in the league with Damian Lillard. You had a bunch of role players that shot threes around them, and you couldn't somehow create a good offense out of that, which was, to me, that was probably the most baffling part about last year's team. It really prevented them from being, anything more than kind of what they were, which was, that kind of outsider-ish, battling for a home court, but then don't get it type of team. So, we've seen Doc, he's coached lots of different teams. He's been around long enough. The Clippers post Blake, I guess it was, like he's coached some like kind of frisky teams that maybe were not as talented as some of his sort of contending teams. So I think he's shown an ability at times to kind of figure stuff out. And certainly last year at the end of the year when they were without Dame, they, like I said, they played their best basketball to end the season, winning 8 straight without Dame. So maybe Doc can kind of figure that out, and maybe they can kind of play a more coherent style where they're not trying to, always kind of trade off the Giannis and Dame stuff in ways that aren't ideal. But again, like, do I trust that Doc Rivers is going to fully optimize this version of the Bucks that is not as talented as they were the last 2 years when they didn't win 50 games? No, I'm not going to make that leap either. So I think the downside, I think Doc is probably like a floor raiser type coach in a lot of ways when you don't have an incentive to lose. But he also, I think, brings the ceiling. So 35 wins, maybe 43 is like the target. Is there some scenario where they could get to 50? I doubt it. But again, I think to do that, you probably have to put that kind of lone future unprotected pick into play and kind of make a big swing, or again, like I've spent lots of time looking at who's got salary that can match for Kyle Kuzma. And again, like it's probably not something that's going to certainly put you into a legitimate contending type of place. Unless the Joe Dumars decides he doesn't want Trey Murphy anymore. But he clearly doesn't really value unprotected Bucks picks the way he put that one into play that he sent to Atlanta. So I don't know if the 2031 will will sway him either. He probably won't be around to use it regardless. But yeah, so I think this team obviously has a ceiling. And me as someone who's going to watch every game and, obviously hope that things go well, there's definitely some things that I think it's going to be interesting to watch. But yeah, I mean, it is a different sort of era here now in terms of, expectations.
Today's show is brought to you by OpenPhone. If you're running a business, every missed call is money left on the table for you potentially. Think about the last time you actually had an urgent need, perhaps for a plumber or a service provider. If they didn't answer the first time, did you actually wait or call them back? Probably not. You probably moved on, and that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the number one business phone system. It's built to streamline and scale your customer communications all from the same app on your phone or your computer. OpenPhone also lets you manage your business calls and texts from a single app, and the shared inbox feature is a game changer for you. Your team can actually jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat at all. And OpenPhone also has an AI agent that can handle the calls after hours, answer common questions, and capture any leads so that you never miss a customer. OpenPhone is also offering my listeners 20% off the first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's OPENPHONE, openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over for you at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. We've talked about like what they'll be on the court this year to a reasonable degree. We have to do this, right? It's actually I was not planned. We've been talking about this for a few days now. But on a day when we got yet another round of will he or won't he from Shams and ESPN about Giannis, which I don't know if that means anything, but we're recording this on Tuesday, August 5th. I have to ask what you think about the whole saga. I thought we put this to bed. I thought Giannis was going to just be fine and be there, and maybe that's the case, and you're following this closer than I am. But it's two-pronged. Number one is, if he's not on the team, the pick becomes more interesting this year. And then number two is, and you know this, Hawks fans have been dreaming about Giannis as a team to trade for Giannis as well. And I don't know if the Hawks want to do that. We'll see. But I have said, and I wonder what you think as someone on the other side, I think the Hawks, if Giannis became available, which I don't think is currently, could make a very reasonable offer. They have lots of stuff to offer, including a former Wisconsinite, Jalen Johnson, potentially. So I say all that. Where are you at on the Giannis meter right now? What's going on in your head compared to where ESPN won't let it die? I know that much.
Yeah. I mean, ESPN's been talking about it since, the 2019 Eastern Conference Finals, basically. Fair. Talking about, Giannis doing it. So it's just kind of comes with the territory. At this point, there will always be Giannis trade talks, probably so long as he's in Milwaukee. And I'll say this too. I'm not offended by being asked. Of course I know.
Oh, I know. I mean,
you're not being offended. There are Bucks fans. But there are Bucks fans that, I get it. If you're a fan, it's not fun when the only reason your team is being talked about is in the context of your best player, potentially asking for a trade when he hasn't done that. He never has. And it's all very vague, and the sourcing is sort of unclear.
It's part of why I didn't want to lead with that. I wanted to talk about the Bucks for 20 minutes, and then we'll do this last and talk about Giannis.
And for those listening, I told Brad I'm happy to talk about this. I'm not disgusted by this or offended or whatever. So yeah, I mean, so I think I'll say a couple of things. One, I came into this summer, my kind of mental. I mean, I've said this on our podcast. I thought it was 60-40. He's going to be back. That was definitely the lowest optimism I've ever had going into an offseason that Giannis was going to come back. This is the first time I've ever felt okay, there actually may be a credible chance that he would ask out. And I think, to be clear, if you're the Bucks, if you're John Horst ownership, you cannot trade Giannis. You cannot be the one to go to Giannis and say hey, Giannis, I think probably it'd be good if you moved on. He's the best player in franchise history. He's meant everything to the city, this franchise. He's won a championship. He is minted. He is the prodigal son, everything, right?
Yep.
If he's, doomed to a Dirk-like end where the Bucks just sort of kind of screw around and are a fringe playoff team for the next 3-4 years, and he never gets another shot at a championship. It is what it is. To me, I as a fan, I'm okay just kind of going down with that ship. And it, again, I I would love for him to win another championship in Milwaukee. If he were to ever to get traded, I would absolutely root for him to win a championship elsewhere, and I don't do that with a lot of other players.
Yeah.
But he deserves that. He's been amazing. And, there would be no hard feelings if he ever kind of decided to do that. So there definitely was more uncertainty, I think. And I've talked to other people kind of in the orbit of the Bucks who I think shared that sort of similar view of like, we think he's coming back, but who knows? Maybe this is the year that something changes, given his age, given where his contract is, given that the team is, you can't sort of trick yourself into believing things that maybe you did a couple of years ago when he signed the extension after the Dame trade, which to me, in a lot of ways validates, this is my glass half full. Like the Dame trade almost validated itself. It was like, in some ways you could say it couldn't have gone worse. It got Giannis to sign another
extension. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which if he does, who knows if that trade doesn't happen, who knows what kind of happens there. So that's kind of I think the background on it. I think the other thing I would add too is like, in terms of like, if Giannis got to the point where, and look, does Giannis think he's going to win a championship in Milwaukee this year? I doubt it. Right. Like Shams like making it seem like, Giannis is evaluating stuff day by day and trying to figure out if he can contend. Like, I don't think Giannis is like that delusional. I think Giannis probably just like wants them to sign his brother Thanasis, which I think is going to by the way, if I was betting, I think that probably happens, on like a Friday afternoon news dump.
And why not? I mean, like I'm all about nuance and like everything matters. I do believe that, but if that's the cost of doing business, you just do it. Who cares?
It is what it is. A lot of Bucks fans have kind of debated that over the years, but
I get it.
It is what it is. And the other side too of this is, and I think it's so interesting that Dame goes back to Portland, because first off, I think if we want to talk about like the psychology of Giannis, right? And I won't claim to obviously like know Giannis personally or how he thinks, but I think being in the orbit of this and talking to people that know Giannis and all that, like, I don't think New York or LA is like some magical thing that he lusts over. I don't think he would lust over going to a big market. I think if he wanted to leave, it would be to prioritize going to a place where he thinks he can compete for a championship. I also don't think he would want to go someplace where he is like, could be perceived like KD was when he went to Golden State. I think, he does not want to be like the second banana or the like mercenary guy. I love Giannis. He's amazing. He's a team player, but he also has an ego. I think he wants to be the best player on a team. I think that's partly why he's in Milwaukee now, is because he kind of relishes the idea of being point Giannis and having kind of the entire Bucks system revolve around him and showcase kind of his talents this year. I think that's sort of fun, probably fun for him, and not something he can necessarily do, on other teams with better players. So I think he would want to go someplace where he can win a championship. And, I think coming into the summer, I probably would have looked at Houston as like the best sort of candidate team, because he definitely would be the best player there. They definitely needed him. They have a ton of stuff they could trade to the Bucks. And they also like could have been good enough to compete at a really high level, even after giving up a lot to the Bucks. But the flip side with Houston, the one thing you would say going against Houston in this sort of scenario would be they are still in the West, which if you're trying to win championships, obviously is not a selling point. So I think, if I were going to make like a short list of teams where, again, caveating this, I'm not trying to run Giannis out of town.
Sure.
By the way, it was really weird. I acknowledged, like I was on some podcast with Yossi Goslin, and we were talking about how like, there's a scenario where if Giannis demands a trade, like, maybe the Bucks end up being like just as good off or better over the longer term, because, they're not going to win a championship with him in the next couple of years. If they get a bunch of reload, like, maybe that works out okay for them. Again, never have I said the Bucks should do that. I would not trade Giannis unless he demands it. But, life could go on if that's what he wanted to do. Right. And again, it would be very difficult for the Bucks given where they are with draft picks and all that. They can't tank in the way a team normally would in this scenario if they were to lose Giannis. But I think if you're looking at teams that could kind of credibly sort of meet those requirements that we're talking about, I mean, the Hawks are probably as good a candidate as any in the Eastern Conference. I mean, he might like to go to the Knicks in sort of the abstract, but I don't know. That's also like kind of a different sort of situation to go into. I don't think they have great sort of trade assets to give the Bucks. Like, do the Bucks want Cat? and a couple picks for him. Like, I don't think that really
Probably not.
Yeah. Then they're basically, the Timberwolves of, 5 years ago or whatever. So I think, I think Atlanta actually has like some kind of credible options in terms of trade angles for this. What should Giannis be worth in a trade? I mean, I don't know how you value him, especially
a lot.
I mean, I don't know. With 2 years left on his deal, I mean, everybody, Bucks fans will obviously look at like the Gobert trade, the Mitchell trade, like these trades as sort of analogs and say, like, well, Giannis is better than those dudes, and those dudes got like insane amounts of value. Or the Paul George trade, right, with Shea, which of course, Shea wasn't Shea at the time. So again, like, what is enough for Giannis? I don't know, right? Like, how many picks do you have to put in? Obviously, the Hawks don't have like the cache of picks that some teams do. But with the likes of Jalen Johnson, by the way, he went to my rival high school, so I'd have to.
I did not know. I mean, obviously I knew he was from up there, but I did not know that.
I'm Homestead High School. He's from the town over, Nicolay. But yeah, I mean, like, they at least, like, on paper, right? Like, when you talk about Jalen Johnson and obviously, like, then we starting to get like, okay, you have Risa Shea, obviously, like, prospecty, and you have obviously other pieces that you could kind of tack on around that. Again, like, is that making you whole for Giannis? No, of course not, right? Like, you're not going to go compete for a championship in the next few years with what you get out of that trade from the Hawks. But, again, like, I think, honestly, I don't think Giannis would go to the Bucks and say, just trade me. Because I think he would be worried of going someplace where he just kind of, is on a team that can't win there either.
I feel like nobody does that anymore.
Yeah. And then, I mean, look at Dame, right? Like, Dame ended up actually on a very good team with the Bucks with another superstar. But it didn't work out. And then he just went back home to Portland and said,
I mean, I feel like any player on Giannis's level, and we don't have to keep going on this, but I think they're not going to just go ask for it. It's going to be a trade with, here's my list, or like, hey, don't send me to, I mean, and the Bucks, to your point earlier about not wanting to trade him at all, the Bucks are not going to suddenly turn around and say, all right, we're sending you wherever we want to send you. Like, that's not going to happen. Let's be practical. Obviously, they can. There'll be somebody in the comments that says, well, they can do whatever they want. Yeah, obviously, we know they can do whatever they want. But they're not going to send him to pick your Sacramento. That's not going to happen,
right.
So, no, I mean, I've staunchly resisted doing like, hey, let's just figure out what's going to cost. I don't want to do that. My only point with the Hawks would be if he's available, and again, he's not right now, they have a reasonable offer to make. They have players and they have a couple of tradable picks that they wanted to trade him out. And to your point, Giannis could at least reasonably look at Atlanta and say, I can win there. It's not a perfect situation. I'm not saying the Hawks are the only team that could trade for him, but they kind of check all the boxes if you want to look at it that way of like, would have enough left over for Giannis to be like, all right, I can win here. Big enough market. I don't think he cares about that much, but it's a good sized city. And then also they have the stuff to offer. That's kind of it. And it's the Eastern Conference. And I agree. All these guys, especially Giannis, why would you want to go to West if you were Giannis? Like, I don't know why you would in a vacuum. Maybe it was a perfect situation. So it's worth talking about. But I have like purposely, and not just to not offend people like you, Frank. I'm not just holding out for Bucks fans. I won't do like the deep. People always like, what? I've answered mailbag questions about it before. I've done segments about it. But I'm not going to do like the 2-hour, here's what Giannis is going to be cost to the Hawks. Like, if he's actually available, then we'll wrap it up. But like, for now, it's like,
Yeah, I don't think, the Hawks are probably going to be, it's going to be a productive use of time to be spending, trying to dream up Giannis offers when he hasn't asked out. And
no, it's August. People are bored. It's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, the Hawks, it's so funny. You'll appreciate this as someone who's been creating podcasts and blogs and forever. The Hawks had this, like, by all accounts, awesome offseason that everybody's excited about, even nationally. Like, they've gotten attention nationally that they haven't gotten in years. And then because it got quiet for like 2 weeks, people just start itching. It's like, all right, what's next on the agenda?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, they had an awesome offseason. Have you already forgotten? It's only August 5th. Like, they just did a lot of stuff. They got Porzingis and Alexander Walker and all this stuff in one summer, and now it's like, what else are they going to do? It's like, well, they've been pretty busy so far.
Yeah,
so,
let's see if this works, right? Which like I think the Hawks are. I mean, interesting to be talking Bucks and Hawks, right? Because there is, I think, sort of this implied like, okay, is this finally the year, right? Certainly, the consensus would be that this is the year where the Hawks, finally get over the hump perhaps into
at least to some. Yeah, I mean, I certainly think they are the best they've been since they met the Bucks in the conference finals.
Since
4.5 years ago,
since the paths last crossed in the Eastern Conference Finals. But is this the year where the teams kind of cross each other in the standings again for the first time in a long time? Certainly could happen. I think it's. I mean, the East I think is just really interesting because like other than Cleveland and probably New York, I mean, I think the Knicks are certainly going to be better than like a team like the Bucks, and I'd have a hard time betting on anybody else. Maybe there's a scenario where like Orlando, maybe the Hawks, like if like Mike Brown just doesn't work for whatever reason with that roster. But beyond those two teams, I mean, there's just so much flux. I mean, like you probably looked at the Celtics roster and it's just like, oh my God, like what is left of the Celtics? It's like crazy. Like what are they going to have 2 years from now when Tatum's back? Like it's just kind of
they're
crazy.
Clearly resetting, and I mean. They went and signed Chris Boucher today as we're talking on Tuesday. And then actually he's like maybe their
the
best front court player. Like, it's a weird, you're right. So, and the consensus, I think if you look at FanDuel odds, whatever you want to look at, Cleveland's kind of in their own mini tier.
Yeah.
New York's kind of in the next one. And then it's some combination of Orlando, Atlanta. If you're a big believer in Milwaukee, if you're a big believer in a couple other teams, like I get it. And Boston falling way down. I think Indiana, while they're going to be competitive as they always are, like they're going to fall down. Like they kind of have to without Halliburton and Turner. Like they're not the same team. Miami, I don't really believe. So like, it is open, and that's part of the optimism for the Hawks. It's part of why to bring this full circle. Like the Bucks can still be a top 4 or 5 team in the East, even with this kind of very clearly flawed roster, because they have Giannis and they have depth, and the East is wide open. So.
And I think this, and I should say too, we reference Dame and sort of Dame dictating to an extent how you have to play on both ends. I think going from Brook to Turner also, I mean, your base defense, right? You're still going to be at your core a drop defense. You still have, a 3-and-D stretch big in Turner. But I think Brook, especially, last year, his inflexibility in terms of the way that they kind of were able to match up and sort of play style. I mean, on the one hand, like you're never going to look at Turner and be like, oh, he's a switch anything big guy or something like that, right? Like he's not a versatile big, like, an Okongwu or something like that, right? He's certainly much more of a Kristaps Porzingis type of guy. But I think he certainly can play in more versatile ways than Brook can. And, I was always like a Brook over Bobby Portis guy, but it's like you look at like the playoff on-off numbers for those two guys. I mean, it hurts my soul to see how much worse they were with Brook in the playoffs, really the last like 4 years, and especially the last 2 years when I think the Pacers were just really bad matchups for the Bucks. So I think in a lot of ways, as much as I love Brook, the kind of time had come to be able to replace him with a guy who still brings a lot of the kind of positives on both ends that he does, but without like some of the inflexibility, or at least a little bit more flexibility, I think certainly helps. And honestly, I think the Bucks also just probably needed they needed a shakeup to an extent. Obviously, you didn't want the shakeup to come at the expense of Damian Lillard's Achilles. But I think, if there's a version of this team that can suddenly be more than the sum of their parts, unlike the last couple of years when they were less than the sum of their parts, it probably needed, to go away from, as successful as it was, to go away from Brook being the locked in starting center every night. And again, he was super durable, so he was always there. I'm definitely really, interested. I mean, this is how people like us sort of get out of bed and cover 82 games a year of not always great basketball for me now. What has it been? 18 years.
A long time.
You're a little bit younger than me, maybe, but not you. You started probably around the same time, right? Like, weren't you?
Yeah, a little bit after, but not much. Yeah, I was at Peachtree at like 2011, 12. So
yeah. So I mean, we're sickos, right? So we find reasons to get excited and talk about these things in August and September every year, even when like you guys, I think Hawks fans, I think have a good reason for some excitement. Bucks fans, maybe we're being a bit more defensive and less optimistic.
Understandably, yeah.
But I mean, even if I don't think this is like, even if I'm not as high on this team, I'm still really looking forward to seeing what it's like. I hope Giannis just puts up absolutely monster numbers and sort of drags this team to, the 4th seed and, gets himself a chance at another MVP, that would be a super fun outcome, even if, the ceiling of this team is like the 2nd round or something like that. Right. So, but 3 straight years out in the 1st round, like maybe I'll take a 2nd round exit at this point.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
Exactly.
No, it should be interesting. Like, we're both on record. I think the Hawks are probably rooting more against the Pelicans than the Bucks, if we're being realistic. But it'll be interesting to watch. The Hawks will be watching the Bucks all season long for various reasons.
I hope, and I would guess that these teams will be following each other more so because they're hopefully being competitive in the standings and not because the Hawks are curious about where their pick will end up.
No, I think the same thing. As long as Giannis is upright, I'm pretty sure that's going to be more of the case. The only real big downside scenarios are Giannis. I mean, I would never root for an injury, and I really like Giannis. So that's where it's going to be. I think they'll be battling maybe in the standings, and I covered their NBA Cup game last year in Vegas, and that was a fun one for the Bucks, not the Hawks necessarily, but. Well, Frank, I won't keep you any longer. I appreciate you doing this. We talked about it before I brought you in, but if you would plug anything you got going on, I know people want to follow the Bucks now. If you're a Hawks fan, probably this season. So, where can they do that in your emeritus, whatever emeritus role you're still in?
Well, yeah, I probably do. I'm probably on about once a week on Locked On Bucks with Camille Davis and Justin Garcia, who are awesome, and we'll probably be doing a mailbag here pretty soon. But yeah, I tweet at FMaddenNBA. So. I like to think I provide relatively level-headed Bucks takes. So if Hawks fans are looking for some, fairly level-headed and maybe not overly frequent tweets about the Bucks, feel free to give me a follow. And hopefully, Brad, for my sake, I hope in like 6 months we're not talking about like, oh man, so what do you think about that Bucks pick inevitably conveying this year? I hope.
Yeah, I might have to call. Yeah, if something goes wrong for Milwaukee, I will apologize to you, and then I will probably still ask you to come on the podcast to talk about.
Hopefully we're talking. Hopefully we're talking doing a 2nd round playoff preview next spring.
That'd be more fun.
Let's shake hands on that, Brad. That's what we'll all root for next year.
I would. That'd be way more fun for sure. But yeah, if people look, I am level-headed to a fault. So if Hawks fans follow me and listen to the podcast, they probably would enjoy your brand of analysis on the Bucks too. It's somewhat similar anyway. So thank you, Frank, for doing this. I appreciate it. Hopefully it wasn't too much torture. As for everybody else, please subscribe to Locked On Hawks. Follow me if you want to, and we'll see you all next time.